Hello everyone and welcome back. Now in this video Leah is going to be, I believe, setting up all of the GUI skin that we're going to be using. Now I want to take just a moment and say a huge thank you for Lee, because I really have been kind of pushing him a little hard tonight for us to get these videos recorded, and for me it's about 5:40 in the morning, which means for Lee it is 6:40 in the morning. And Lee got up early yesterday as well, so it's been a very long day and night for both of us. And Lee has been doing a lot of talking. He's been doing a fantastic job. I'm just, this is the little pump-up speech, Lee. Just, get you going, get your mind out of the gutter now.
You can do it. You can do it.
That's right. You can do it. So
don't forget, you got the class to moderate tonight too. So don't worry about that.
Yeah, we got the class and the discussion of persistence tonight. So that's going to be some fun stuff.
I think I'm losing my voice. I can't talk that far.
So for those of you that are watching this, head on over to the forums in the MMO classroom and just the general lounge area. And let's all say a big thank you to Lee for all of this amazing hard work tonight, because I know he's really dying to go get some sleep. But with that said, let's do it, Lee.
So now I want to go to sleep even more than I did before.
Oh, come on.
All right, we're going to roll through some of the settings for our UI skin. We're going to get the basic ones in place. I still reserve the right to come back and modify these at a later time if I choose to.
Absolutely.
Now, our box is pretty much done. We just need the simple one for our normal setting. There's not a lot of stuff that we do with the box. The button one, we're going to be using this guy a little bit differently than its normal intention, because normally you've got a background texture for your button, and that's what is there all the time. But because we're not really using our buttons as buttons, but more as toggles, and I've gotten creative with the use of them, I'm going to set its normal state to off. I'm going to use its hover state as our box texture. So I'm reusing our box texture as our button hover state. And then I'm going to use our button active here, using our box active. And then for our on normal, we are going to use our button on texture, which is just basically an underline that's kind of glowing a bluish tint. Now, the reason these ended up in the button is because when I first coded the UI, I had coded them all as buttons, and then I switched over and set them up as toggles.
Mm-hmm.
So we could technically do the same thing with the toggles if we wanted to do that, but there's some additional functionality that is in toggles that we don't have with buttons. Mm-hmm. And I'm not completely convinced that I don't want one of these traditional toggles at this point. So if I still end up with a traditional toggle, I don't want to break this functionality yet. Mm-hmm. But I do know in our UI we're not going to have a regular button per se. So we're going to use our buttons instead of the toggle overloads.
Okay.
So if I need something else, I could always create a custom variant as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Now, we're going to need to set up our borders and our padding and our margins different than we've got.
So a student question. I try to slip these in and pretend like I really don't know anything, because I don't, to think about how students might be looking at this. But when you go to lay out your own custom GUI skin like this, do you generally, I know when I do it, I actually code elements onto the screen so that I like using the inspector to interactively adjust stuff and say, no, yes, perfect. So when you actually put this together the other night,
you get to see what I did in the demo video with the box. Mm-hmm. I do the exact same thing for each element that I put together, and I'm messing around with the settings. Mm-hmm. I put the element as a larger element right in the center of my screen.
Cool.
And I dial it in, And then once I've got all those settings, then I move on to the next one.
I got you. Funny,
So,
I actually just start building the UI that I'm shooting for.
well,
And
if you really want to break it down to the full way I go about it,
mhm.
I don't even build the UI in Unity, and this is probably where we differ a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I break out Photoshop and I design my UI
Because
the
I
way I
hate
want it to look.
Photoshop.
And, yeah. So I go into Photoshop. I design my UI as I am envisioning, and you've seen those prototypes
Yeah,
when
I
we're
have.
working with the tech demos. I'll mock everything up in Photoshop, and then I'll pass it off to you, get your opinions, and I can very quickly modify things there. The only difference is with playing with the UI skin in the elements ahead of time is you start to get a feel for what you can and can't do
Mm-hmm.
as far as UIs, and then that influences the way that you draw stuff in Photoshop.
Okay.
Then once I've got my UI laid out in Photoshop, I'll break it apart into its base components, which is nice about doing everything on layers, because then I can break down a background layer or a button to its base components, split them up, and then bring them into the GUI skin. Once I've got that, the images brought in and put into a resources folder, I'll make my GUI skin, and then I'll create my elements on screen in the center, and I'll build one at a time
Mm-hmm.
and make sure that all my settings in my GUI skin are right, and before I get into the code. And then once I've got each of the components working the way I think they should work, then I start building everything inside of scripting.
Okay. I just figured we'd have some students out there watching this video and that have, never done this before, and they might be wondering, well, how do you go about it? What is your workflow? How did you come up with this? But okay, cool.
Yeah, just like everything else, a lot of back and forth, throwing magic numbers at it until I get what I want. And then I don't comment the whole process, so I
Of
have to
course
be in
not. And
bed at the next time.
you hard code everything in. You do everything you can to see if you can make me twitch. Since I have promised, I'll do my best to keep my mouth closed. You can use whatever style you want. Sometimes I swear I think you're doing certain things just to see if you could make me squeak or make my chair go.
I would never, ever do
I
that.
hear you smiling now.
Hey, well, it depends. I mean, on these videos, some of the stuff that goes in are just really quick and dirty. So it's, for the most part, I try to keep it clean. Is it professional level code? No, it's R&D code.
Yeah, I know.
But some of the stuff that,
It's
I
proof of
play around.
concept, and I mean, and there's already a lot of stuff that has changed since you started with the terrain system, 2 months back. And there's a lot of stuff that we're keeping that we know that we can speed up once we get into a solid design. But with just rough code being thrown in and getting some good performance and some good control out of it, makes us really happy to know, wow, when we get this really cleaned up, it's going to be pretty sharp.
But there are the occasional thing that are just fun to mess with. But that's usually stuff that you get to see off camera. That because you get to see some really rough stuff, which is always fun. But I don't do a whole lot of stuff completely procedural anymore.
No, you've come quite a ways.
All right, this one is getting a little bit interesting. Vertical scroll bar. This is a built-in Unity one that usually codes out kind of like the slider on the side, kind of like this. Not quite as nice as this one though,
Mm-hmm.
where it's got the indentation and then you've got your little slide bar that goes up and down. And that wasn't the look that I was going for. So I'm reusing my vertical separator to simulate it. So I've got this nice straight up and down line.
Okay.
Now, what I was kind of hoping is getting more like the equalizer effect, where you've got the button that's wider, the slide out.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't figured out how to do that, because you would think, oh, yeah, scroll bar thumb. That should be exactly what I need. And then you would change the normal image here, because this is the little sliding indicator that you get. for their built-in one.
Mm-hmm.
But if you change this, it does absolutely nothing. So I haven't figured out exactly what's going on with that. And I've gone through all of these and changed everything inside of the GUI skin. But apparently inside, when you call from scripting, it's pulling this information not from this part of the GUI skin. It's pulling it from the default location. And there's not an overloaded call for the begin vertical scroll bar GUI call to over or point the style for this thumb. So you can't change it.
Interesting.
I'll have to do some more research on it, but it wasn't that important to me that I was going to spend a lot of time trying to figure it out. It was just something of note. All right, now for this guy, our settings are going to be, all of our borders are going to be 0 because the vertical separator is an 8x8 texture, so there's no real borders for it. Now our padding, this one's going to be a little bit weird. It's a -3 because that's going to control how that thumb is going to be centered up on the bar. So by putting a -3 on the padding, it lines the thumb, the slider thumb, right in the center, or its center right along with that line. So that's where that -1 comes from. And then our rest of our paddings are all 0, and our margins are set to 0. And those are the initial settings that I used for the UI skin. There's not a whole lot because, excuse me, if you remember back to the demo, there are the buttons, which are technically toggles, but we're using them in a non-traditional sense. There's the separator bar, and then depending on which brush you have selected, there are some of the vertical sliders, which
Mm-hmm.
I'm not overriding their look. I'm using the default look for the vertical slider,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm using the default look for the horizontal sliders that we use for opacity and strength. So we're not overriding those. There is a vertical scroll bar that appears when we select the stencil brush, and I am overriding that. And then we're overriding the box, which is the background of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that will give us the look that we're going for with the minimum number of overrides of the default behavior. There is one more, I believe. I'll have to scroll down. And this guy is a custom style. So we're going to create a custom style. And I'm going to give it the name of stencil. Now this is how we're going to deal with drawing the outline around the outside of the stencils.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've already got the button that's working on the tools and the brushes, but the stencils are a different size, so we're going to have to deal with those slightly different. So we've got to take a hover image, and we've got a stencil hover, and we've got a stencil on normal that we're going to use. Now the stencil hover is a yellowish color box that's going to surround it. That's going to indicate whatever the mouse is over. On normal is going to be the stencil that is currently active, and this is a bluish tinted square that's going to surround it.
Okay.
Its borders are set to 1, 1, 1, and 1 because it's exactly 1 pixel all the way around it. Our padding is also 1 by 1 by 1 by 1. This is going to take our texture and inset it 1 pixel around from the edges. If I didn't do this, we'd see the texture, but the background would disappear,
Mm-hmm.
so we wouldn't see the highlight. So we have to pad in our texture to get the effect that we need. And I think that is all the settings that I've got set up for the GUI skin. So
Okay.
you'll get to see how we deal with any overriding our standard GUI skin styles, as well as how we call a custom style.
Awesome.
So we'll demonstrate a little bit of everything with this one.
Okay. Well, with that, that is going to wrap this video up. Thanks a lot, everyone.